Okay, so basically what I'm going to be covering here is a very brief introduction to classical clustering. And then I'm going to talk about two, new being a relative term because random forest and predicts have actually been around for a few years, but not nearly as long as classical clustering. So to many people, they're relatively new approaches to unsupervised learning. And then I'm going to apply the techniques to insurance data. There are two data sets I talk about, but the overwhelming majority of what I'm showing is fraud applications. But I will be saying something about a publicly available automobile insurance data set. Okay, now part of the reason I'm doing this topic, like a lot of other people, if I'm already working on a certain area and I maybe take that work and extend it a little, it's more efficient than to do a completely new topic. So it turns out that when I was the Vice President of Research for the Casualty Actuarial Society, and that was a 3-year appointment by the Board of Directors of the Casualty Actuarial Society, my last month or so, some people approached me for funding for a book about predictive modeling, but for actuaries. Because one of the things, those of us doing predictive modeling in insurance, one of the things we notice is there's very little data mining literature out there that applies the techniques to insurance data. So we were hoping this would be, and the other thing is, actuaries are a little behind in being acquainted with analytical techniques, including many classical multivariate techniques. So this book is going to be an introduction to predictive modeling, including many classical techniques that have been around a while. And there is a publisher for the book, Cambridge University Press. And we are hoping to publish it in the fall of 2002. And I am co-authoring the chapter. After I went and asked for funding for the book, I was then asked to write, and I was no longer a vice president of research. I was asked to write one of the chapters. So I am working on the chapter on unsupervised learning. And the first draft had a deadline of early May, May 1st, which I didn't exactly meet, but gave them a draft of something about a week later. And that was when I got to start on my presentation for here. So some of the material comes from that chapter, but, and there's going to be a second volume of the book that's going to be more advanced and applications. So the chapter itself is really still focusing more on classical approaches such as principal components and classical clustering. And the more advanced things I'm doing are going to be probably in volume 2. This is just a little bit about the book project. It just reiterates some of what I've said. Certainly volume 1 is, the intent is to keep it more introductory because we have many members who, while in the actuarial syllabus, they did get exposure to regression and time series and a few things. They did not get exposure to other multivariate techniques such as factor analysis and clustering. So we are assuming they know nothing about it. They've never seen those things. And then there will be so the work on the first volume is very far underway. They actually have been sending around now requests for people to author the chapters in the second volume. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my data sets. The first data set is one I've used a couple of times in the past in papers I've written. It is a fraud data set that was collected by the Automobile Insurers Bureau of Massachusetts. It's 1993 data, but it actually has been made the rounds in the research world. It's been used quite a lot by people doing research on analytical methods, including data mining methods. There are a few dependent variables in the data. Now, what this research study involved was a number of claims experts that would include claims adjusters, maybe lawyers and such, were given the files of a number of claims, and they were asked to rate the claim on a scale of 0 to 10 on how likely they thought it was a fraud or abuse claim. And a 0 would be like no, totally legitimate claim, and a 10 would be egregious, planned fraud, whatever. And then there were range in between. There was also a second potential dependent variable that was basically, we think this is fraud or legitimate, but there were a couple of kinds. There was opportunistic fraud versus staged fraud.